Welcome to the Electric Wire Podcast. We bring you news and views on the most pressing issues facing Wisconsin's electric industry, from policymakers, executives, and customer and environmental advocates. Bringing you these discussions, we are the Customers First Coalition. Here's your host, Executive Director Kristen Jilks.
Welcome to the Electric Wire Podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Jilks. On Wednesday, February 23rd, Wisconsin State Representatives Mike Kuglich, Jill Billings, and Beth Myers hosted speakers from Wisconsin's investor-owned utilities to share more about why home heating costs are higher than average this year, including the external market forces driving up the cost of natural gas. The briefing was open to all legislators and their staff, and we're proud to share a recording with you here. On this episode, we're sharing nearly the entire briefing with some clips of my voice inserted after the fact to help explain anything that wasn't clear on the original audio. And before we begin, I also wanted to acknowledge the retirement announcements of two legislators you'll hear at this briefing. We're wishing all the best to friends of the Customers First Coalition, Representative Mike Kuglich and Representative Beth Myers. It was an honor to work with both of them on energy and utility issues over the past few years. Now to a clip of Chairman Kuglich kicking off the meeting.
I was just telling a story how we kind of got this together is Jill sent a letter asking if we could do a program, a little meeting, and have people from the utilities that can answer the question that her office, my office, and I'm sure other offices are getting is, why are my utility and heating bills so expensive this year?
Now to opening remarks from Representative Billings.
Listening on some of those social medias like Nextdoor, those kind of things where people are saying, oh my gosh, this is incredible, what's happening? And we were receiving letters in our office, as a lot of legislators have. So I know that my staff, Eric and Chandra, they called Alliant Energy, who's from our area, to just have nice conversations. And I appreciate the conversations that we can have with all of you to help explain to people who are wondering what's happening.
Now you'll hear from Representative Beth Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of years ago, we were all getting calls at our office about the unemployment. How do I get my unemployment? And record numbers of calls were coming into our offices. And now it's what's with my utility bill and how can I afford to pay this? And a point Jill brought up was, if you're struggling and you're not being able to buy food or diapers and then get stuck with a bill that you weren't expecting, that's hard on a family. There's emotional toll included in that. And long before this job, I used to work for a social service department. And I remember every May 14th-ish, people would come in and say, tomorrow my utility can be shut off. What am I supposed to do? My response was always, well, have you called them? Have you negotiated a repayment plan? Did you make any payments in the last 6 years? So I think that's all part of this conversation. Not only are the bills high, but for whatever reason you're about to tell me, but we also have to make sure the consumers are doing everything they can. So when that moratorium is lifted, they're not stuck between a rock and a hard place.
So after introductions from these three legislators, Chairman Kuglich turned it over to Bill Skewes of the Wisconsin Utilities Association.
Well, good morning, everybody. Representatives and members and staff, thanks for the chance to brief you all on heating costs this morning. I'm Bill Skewes, Executive Director of Wisconsin Utilities Association. Joining me are Rich Stasik, who is the Director of State Regulatory Affairs, and Sara Mead, who is Director of Gas Supply for WEC Energy Group, and also Vincent, who is the Senior Manager of Energy Markets and Fuel Supply for Alliant Energy. So just a quick word about what Wisconsin Utilities Association is. We are a 501c6 nonprofit that represents the investor-owned gas and electric energy providers before the legislature and the regulatory bodies. WUA members provide safe, reliable, affordable electricity and natural gas services to about 80% of Wisconsin energy customers. Our members serve about 2.5 million electric customers and about 2 million natural gas customers across Wisconsin. We employ 8,420 Wisconsinites, and we spend about 38 million annually with minority-owned businesses, 178 million with women-owned businesses, and 11 million with veteran-owned businesses. Our members pay about 214 million in gross receipts and property taxes, and we hold assets totaling about 42 billion. Our members contribute 15 million annually to charities and provide energy assistance to over $91 million. So I'll just set the table a little bit on the heating situation and the costs as we're hitting the heart of Wisconsin's winter. I'm sure your constituents have noticed an increase in heating costs. And in fact, it's something that we noted as utilities in public last fall, that you could expect to see a monthly increase between $25 and $65 due to higher natural gas costs. That's what's driving this. The range could be from 25% to 45% higher. And for propane, LP, between 30% and 94% higher, above 2021 levels. Just note quickly that our members do not do LP or propane. We don't sell that. We sell natural gas. That's another organization that represents them, but we can speak to the natural gas issues. About 2/3 of Wisconsin homes heat with natural gas, and about 1/8 with heat with propane. So we'll outline some of the key drivers of that cost increase and what customers can do to mitigate those effects. Please note that for more information specific to your district, you probably want to talk to your utility directly. But so natural gas prices and LP prices have risen due to higher demand and struggling production. And just as far as taking notes on what I'm saying, I've got copies of this here, which I'll give to all of you, so don't feel like you have to write all this down. After a decline in the demand for natural gas during the height of the pandemic, when some businesses and factories suspended operations, demand for natural gas rose when those businesses returned to those pre-pandemic levels. Producers of those fuels have since struggled to meet the demand for natural gas. U.S. natural gas prices spiked briefly last February during a winter storm that strained natural gas and electricity markets in Texas and Oklahoma. You may recall seeing that story in the media. Prices then increased through October as economic recovery contributed to overall growth in natural gas demand, which outpaced growth in natural gas supply. At the same time, inventories were low after the February winter storm. Natural gas prices remained volatile due to weather-related consumption, production outages, high international natural gas prices that encourage export of natural gas, pipeline outages, and the price and availability of substitute fuels for power generation, which is another source of demand, and summer storage injection needs, and the slowed pace of production, which I mentioned. And I think some of my members will speak to that in a little bit more detail. And regarding the profits on natural gas and what mitigation steps utilities take and supply, we'll note that natural gas is a pass-through expense, meaning utilities do not earn a profit from the higher cost. In fact, utilities routinely take steps to mitigate price hikes by using procurement approaches that include buying natural gas in the summer months when it's generally cheaper. They also lock in fixed contracts at a guaranteed rate for baseload generation for electricity. And some are even proposing to build natural gas facilities for storage for the coldest days when supplies are shrinking and the prices are spiking. Overall, U.S. natural gas prices were about 3 times higher this fall than at that same point in 2020. Prices have reached a 13-year high, according to the International Energy Agency. That doesn't mean necessarily that bills or rates will go up by that amount, because utilities do those multiple steps. They use hedging strategies to mitigate the risk of the gas price increases over time. And the rates, if you weren't aware of this, are set by the Public Service Commission. The utilities don't set their own rates. The good news is the U.S. has about 100-year supply of natural gas underground. And the issue is the profitability of extracting that gas and refining it at times when there's low demand, such as during the pandemic. So that causes producers to slow production until that demand resumes. And there's a lag between the production and then the eventual sale of that commodity. So the effects of that lag is what we're experiencing today. Question is obviously, what can consumers do about this? Well, you can check with the Focus on Energy, and there's some links in this document which I provided. The Focus on Energy program on installing energy saving equipment like smart thermostats and energy efficient appliances. Low-income Wisconsinites can also apply for cash assistance for weatherizing their homes and for paying heating bills. In fact, I think the threshold is households with an income at or below 60% of the state's median level are eligible to apply for one-time payments to help cover the cost of heating bills through the Wisconsin Home Energy Assistance Program, or WEC as it's known. It's managed through the Department of Administration. Utilities, like the chairman said earlier, also strongly advise, if you're at risk of falling behind on your bills, to talk to your utility, work out a payment plan. And on this document, there are links to all of your utilities and your service territories, and some other links to government agencies that can talk about some of the reasons for these supply issues.
And next to testify was Matt Vincent of Alliant Energy.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Vincent. I work for Alliant Energy. I've been in the energy industry for well over 20 years now, mostly in the energy supply and trading side of the business. So seen a lot of different market events and pricing events play out. Since I joined Alliant back in 2016, and since then have continued to work with the organization to put hedging programs, risk management programs in place to help limit the type of exposure that our customers have to the price of natural gas. Again, like Bill said, it's all passed through. There's no, we aren't taking a piece or in any way involved in that price of the gas. It's passed through to the customers, but we do what we can to try to minimize those costs for customers. That includes some of what Bill was talking about. We do buy the gas forward. Could go out multiple years. That could be physical, financial products, certain derivatives. We're using storage, got quite a large storage position that is contracted storage. It actually comes from Michigan, upper Michigan. And that's used primarily for the winter. We inject during the summer, prices are lower, and use it during those peak days in the winter months. So there's a couple of tools at our disposal that we use to try to minimize the impact that we're seeing in the underlying commodity market. Unfortunately, where we're at right now is if you look at where prices have been the last, say, 3 winters, this past winter coming into this winter, October, November timeframe, there was a lot of risk built into the market. Demand had started to pick up again. Inventories were relatively low given the extremely strong February that we had last year. That was Winter Storm Uri, or 2 Februarys ago, so that was Winter Storm Uri. In addition to that, you've got all-time record high exports, both pipeline and liquefied natural gas, LNG. And that continues to be built out. That export capacity continues to be built out. At this point, it's fully subscribed. So when you watch the news and see the risk in Europe, there's limited exposure for the U.S. natural gas price, other than just to move in sympathy with the price in Europe. We've already maxed out what we can export. That is changing, though, because there are more projects in the queue, more export capacity is coming. So we'll continue to see our natural gas market be a larger piece of, say, a global commodity market, more similar to, say, oil. So again, that's why it's so important to be as proactive as possible to take measures to try to reduce our exposure, our customers' exposure. This past winter, coming into it, October, November, I think I'd mentioned exports were high, inventories were relatively low. Production didn't respond to the extent that I think the majority of the market wanted it to. There's this perception that, with fracking and shale gas, it's quick to turn on. It wasn't as quick, this price spike, as it has been historically. It has been a steady increase in production. It just hasn't been, going like gangbusters and really overshooting the demand like it has historically. In addition to that, there's a couple of other, say, less well-known variables. You've got a significant drought out west, which is drawing on significant more gas for generation. So less hydro out west is a big deal. Obviously, the backup fuel there is primarily natural gas, so you start to see a lot more gas demand. In addition to that, there's been it's exposed a pretty large inelastic coal market as the markets continue to shrink over the years. The market's ability to respond to the uptick in coal consumption was put to the test and struggled both from a production and from a rail capacity standpoint. So these are just some of the variables that are really driving it. I'd say that those are the key ones that we've been watching and trying to take measures to limit the exposure to the customers for.
Speaking next here is Sara Mead of WEC Business Services.
I agree with everything. We always have to remember gas is priced on the laws of supply and demand. When there's a lot of demand and low supply, prices will go up. It's a basic econ. Go back to the intro level econs, and it is that, we saw that during the pandemic and then the high price in February. Supply had dropped off and demand was recurring and was recovering, and those are the biggest dynamics going on. And there's all these small pieces of demand that are coming back on now, keeping that price where it is. It is definitely bouncing around. You throw that temperature on there too. Cold days, prices go up. People are utilizing more in homes and businesses and power plants and everything. So it's just that equilibrium that we're at that tipping point right now while we're waiting for more production to come on because our demand has recovered and more people are using natural gas right now as we recover in the economy too.
Next, you'll hear a question from Representative Supreme Moore Amakunde about supply chain issues.
What did affect on things like supply chain and the ability to get our trucks from one place to another place? What effect did that have on the cost of our energy? Because you may be demanding it more and that supply is less because more people are demanding it. It costs more, fuel costs more to get trucked from one place to another place. And what I've heard multiple times is supply chain. So what effect did that have on our energy bill?
While I can't speak to the stuff that we need, material things. The bulk of natural gas, especially in Wisconsin, is delivered by pipeline. So limitations of trucking or supply chain was very minimal because the bulk of our gas is supplied through the natural gas pipelines that did not have a disruption. We had a disruption at the wellheads where they froze off due to the cold weather in February, but trucking is not a significant impact to get natural gas in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah,
So supply chain shouldn't have any effect.
I would say not yet. I think that there could be, say, impact to come. So that supply chain disruption could have, let's say, a longer lasting impact on gas supply. So, as you think about like the ability to bring steel in or valves or chips to manage over time, that will ultimately play into the ability to bring, say, more gas expansion to the market. We're not as, say, capable of speaking to that type of what kind of limitation or impact that would have, just because we're more localized. But, the broader, say, pipeline industry, interstate pipeline industry, production, if there's any sort of impact on the supply of parts that are needed for additional wells, I could see that being a potential impact. I think similarly, on the electric side, you start to see supply chain disruptions when it comes to renewables.
Good question, though. Thank you.
And next, as you'll hear, there was a question from the audience about how exports impact the cost of natural gas.
It's all part of, I would say that it's all part of the same market forces. So typically, right now, the prices are strong enough globally in Asia and Europe that there's a lot of room for U.S. gas prices to go up before it actually would start pricing out into those regions. And if it did, chances are those regions would just keep going higher. So, they are separate, but at the same time, they're all part of the same market and subject to the same market forces. So, like Sara said, the laws of the supply demand obviously will pull the gas where it gets the best price.
Good.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just was going to follow up on that if it's okay, Representative.
Sure.
Just on, is it a reliability thing that you're maybe thinking of, that are we selling more out than we should be because we need to meet domestic demand first? Okay. And I think, as far as reliability and meeting your obligation to your customers, that's always going to be first before, and we don't do production of natural gas. We just buy it. So, but I think does that answer your question? Okay. Thank you,
And
Representative.
my question or comment would be, is there ever a time in this country when we say, okay, our prices are going way too high, we're going to stop exporting? And at what point, or here's another question, when you're doing, I don't know, you don't export, right?
We don't produce natural
So
gas. We
when,
buy it. Yeah.
correct. So when the utilities are exporting money to foreign countries, when does the government, federal government, step in and say, okay, we have to stop exporting to meet the national need? I think that may have been what you were getting at.
And the utilities aren't exporting. It's gas production companies.
Okay,
Right. From a broader market perspective, there have been, say, rhetoric around that. I don't know of how much support there is for that, or if it's something that's in the works.
and what is happening with Russia and Ukraine right now, how will that affect prices here?
It will have an impact the more LNG, liquid natural gas production that is built at a Gulf Coast and on the shorelines where they're able to export. Right now, the United States is currently exporting all it has the capability to export. But we are, as in the utilities, are in competition with buying that gas from the producers with the ones buying that gas to export, because it is an open market. In order for the United States to put another LNG in, the federal government requires them to have a contract with someone. So they can't, what we call wildcat, just go put one out and expect it to fill up. They have to have a contract with a foreign body to actually utilize that port.
And Matt, I think you were saying because of the price in Europe, it's profitable for the producer to sell it overseas.
Yes, I would say that my understanding of a lot of these facilities is when they're built, the financing that's involved does require a certain level of commitment. So there's a chance that what's being exported today could have been locked in. And again, this is hypothetical. This is not me having inside knowledge, but just in general, some of that supply could have been locked in at much lower prices than what's going into the market right now. Now there is retrading of those cargoes, but as Sara said, right now it's capped because we can only export so much. So if we get a price movement in response to what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, it would be primarily, I would say, sympathetic in nature.
Well, that was a timely question and response. And I wanted to add here that our hearts go out to the people of Ukraine and they are in our thoughts. And next, I'm going to loop you in on a response to a question about a Federal Reserve of natural gas.
I believe there is. I don't have a whole lot of statistics on it. I know EIA is a great resource for that, and they would be able to list how much we know is in the ground, how much is proven reserves, and reserves might be in the ground, aware of, but not necessarily tapped. But EIA is an excellent resource for all the stuff the federal government knows of.
And I'll note here that we will put in the show notes links to the EIA website and some slides of interest on gas pricing as well. Now I will turn you over to Sara's response to a question about the future of gas prices.
Right now, if I look at future markets, 23, 24, they are going down. I would say right now we're sitting anywhere between $4 and $6, sometimes peaking to $7 on a cold days. You can buy 23, 24 in the $3 to $4 range right now. Is it as low as it was 3 years ago at $2.50? No. Will we ever be there again? Probably not. So reducing, but not to the extent that we have been comfortable with in the past.
Yeah, I think just to add a little bit to that, I think what you're seeing in terms of the producers' discipline this last spike would support what Sara just said in terms of potentially having a new floor to the market. I mean, when we go down to say $2 or even sometimes sub $2 in a cash market, it's driven by acute oversupply. And that was more symptomatic of that production rush to the market and say the demand not materializing.
All right, next you're going to hear Rich Stasik of WEC Energy Group answer a question about the PGA or purchase gas adjustment on customer bills. And we'll also put a link in the show notes to their website explanation of the PGA as well.
So basically what it comes down to, and I'll try to avoid getting wonky to use a word there, but really there's this concept with rate making. And as Bill alluded to, all of our rates are actually approved, authorized, and ordered by the Public Service Commission. So we, at varying intervals, will go in for base rate cases, and that's really where those distribution charges are established. Typically, utilities run on about a 2-year cycle. But because, and it's based on forecasted costs or what we expect it to be in the subsequent year when rates will go into effect, those costs tend to be relatively stable. It's the cost of capital that's been employed, the cost of folks going out into the field and maintaining and operating the system, billing, those types of things. But there's a lot of volatility within the commodity costs. And so what the commission had put in place many years ago was this purchase gas adjustment, which is the PGA, so that what we can do is to avoid a very big dislocation between what customers pay and what our costs are in either direction, quite frankly. Because if you think about it this way, we put everything in base rates and it was just established as there for 2 years until the next rate case. If gas costs went down, well, then we'd have been over collecting and then we had this big amount of money that we need to return to customers in the next rate case. On the alternative, if we established it and then 2 years, throughout that 2-year period, gas costs went up, we would be accumulating what's called a regulatory asset or something we need to recover from customers 2 years later. And so you can imagine with the volatility there, you'd have these really big swings. So instead of a small little swing in there each and every month to adjust for those commodity costs, you would have these big wild swings over 2-year stretches. And it's really meant to mute that and really mitigate or stabilize customer bills. And that's why that PGA is the way it is.
Once a month, the commission does review our rates for gas costs, pure commodity costs, and adjust it accordingly. They look at it, they say if it's reasonable or you did something prudent or imprudent, and then give you the approval to collect that from your customers. And that occurs every month on a backwards looking, and that's why it kind of gets shuffled in the next few months if it's an increase or a decrease.
And we are mindful of customer bill impact. I think one thing you hear is rates. Rates are sort of the mechanical element that defines what a customer's bill is, but we're more mindful of, the bill is what a customer pays. And so we really try to manage our organizations and the costs of them, as well as when we file rate cases, we're very mindful of the impact it'll have on customer bills. And so that's an extremely important element. The other thing I guess I might add, I can speak for the WEC Energy Utility. So it's the holding company that actually owns WEC Energies and WPS. That company was formed back in 2015 when Wisconsin Energy Corp purchased Integris. And we've basically only come in for one base rate increase since 2015 when that closed. That was part of a settlement that was done in 2020. We are ordered to come in for a rate case this year. But by and large, we've really stayed out of rate cases, kept customers' rates and therefore bills flat, but for fuel costs and purchase gas. So fuel costs on the electric side and the gas costs here for our gas customers. And the other thing I would just sort of add is, and maybe some of you would get there, gas costs have what I'll call a read-through effect on electric rates because natural gas is a fuel that is used to generate electricity. So that will come through, well, we throw another acronym out there, the FCA, which is the electric version of the PGA. It stands for the fuel cost adjustment. So again, that's modified. That's actually modified on an annual basis, whether or not we have a rate case or not. But we do flow those costs through, again, on a pass-through basis. We earn zero profit on our fuel costs, whether it be on the electric or the PGA on the gas side.
And building on something that Rich said, and I'm not going to take credit for the piece of information, but he looked it up this morning. According to the EIA, our customer bills are below the national average and below the Midwest average still at this point. So rates and bills are important, but the bill is what you pay, and ours are below the national average and Midwest.
All right, next there was a request to briefly explain what a rate case is, and you'll hear Rich's response.
So a rate case is essentially, to try and put it into a minute or less, is what a utility will file. So in Wisconsin, they have what they call forecasted test year. So you basically use forecasted costs, forecasted sales volumes. And we go through a full audit, but we basically make a filing to the commission that says, based on what we foresee next year. So if our utilities will be filing them this year, it would be for what we refer to as test year 2023. So based on what we expect for costs for the capital we'll be investing or have invested since our last rate case, what our operating costs will be, what we expect sales volumes to be at individual customer levels. Here's what it looks like we would need to set customer rates at. There's an audit that's done by commission staff. There are parties that groups, I'll call them, become parties, which is an intervener. And so they actually have to petition the commission to get what we call full party status. And that's where you would see Citizens Utility Board, the Wisconsin Industrial Energy Group, Renew, Clean Wisconsin, Sierra Club tends to get involved here in the state of Wisconsin. And they'll issue discovery requests and ask information. And we have an obligation to provide that information back and forth. There's a full process. It's quasi-judicial in the sense that there's pre-written testimony, both direct, rebuttal, surrebuttal. Then there's actually a full hearing that the commission holds to go over the technical issues. That's facilitated by the commission's administrative law judge. There's public comment. And then at the end of the process, the commission will deliberate over the number of issues that are there and ultimately establish the rates that'll take effect that following calendar year.
So Rich, once a utility files a rate case, which gives all the information up, on average, how long does it take to get to the end of that process?
By the time, so we would typically file in April, we would have an order by the end of December. So it is about an 8-month process. So there's a lot of scrutiny, a lot of oversight, and commission staff. The last couple of rate cases, we track what we call the discovery request, or all the questions they ask during the audit. We get hundreds upon hundreds of requests for information and have sit downs to go over and review it so that they can fully understand and have whatever support they feel they need to provide an assessment to the commission on the reasonableness and the just and reasonableness of the rates that we're requesting.
Other questions? This might be pretty speculative. You mentioned that you don't earn a profit on the FTA or PGA. Do gas shortages or other fuel shortages result in the need to invest in infrastructure for which utilities do earn a rate of return? I mean, that's pretty speculative, I know, but is there capital investments that need to be made or that utilities make to react to supply chain shortage or fuel shortages upon which they earn a regulated rate of return?
So there are times where we will, as utilities or local distribution companies on the gas side or even electric utilities, will make certain investments in order to help mitigate or mediate cost pressures. However, that process, it depends on what we're going for. There's one of two processes that needs to go through at the commission for approval. One's called the CPCN, Certificate of Public Need and Necessity. The other would be CA, or Certificate of Authority. And so those processes can last 8 months. We've had one recently that took 2 years to go through a full review process. Similar to a rate case, other parties can intervene, ask questions, and they'll oftentimes take opposing positions. One of the things that's of the utmost importance within those proceedings, the commission needs to make a variety of legal determinations. The two primary ones are there's a need for what's being proposed. So therefore the utility isn't just putting some investment in there just for the sake of making the investment. There's a need for that investment to serve customers. And the second is an economic evaluation. And generally speaking, we won't even propose, and frankly, I've been in this role for almost 7 years now. I'm yet to be involved in a project we proposed that doesn't produce benefits to customers from a cost standpoint relative to the alternatives of not making that investment. So the most recent one I'll use as an example, just to kind of drive the point home. WEC Energy's proposed and recently received approval to build 2 liquefied natural gas storage facilities, one for WG customers in southeastern Wisconsin and one for what we call WEGO, or Wisconsin Electric Gas customers. Each one of those will hold 1 billion cubic feet, which is multiple days worth of storage to release into our distribution system on coldest days where there's the highest demand and also generally where there's the highest prices. Because Wisconsin doesn't inherently have the geology to do underground storage. But as we put those particular facilities through the approval process, we were able to demonstrate, even though we're making $174 million investment that we will earn a profit on, even after factoring that in, it will still save customers hundreds of millions of dollars over a 20 to 30 year period compared to not building them and relying on interstate pipeline capacity to meet those needs. So those will be, as we look forward, we'll be filing a rate case. So those costs, and depending on one of them will be in service before the other, but as those go in service, they will be factored into our forecasted test year as capital that's been deployed. Right.
And I would just say similarly at Alliant for WPL, we've had a number of expansion projects that we've moved forward with. Most of those are all of them are driven by increased load or demand for the gas itself. There's not a market-driven incentive to continue to build. Like Rich said, I mean, there can be, say, a financial benefit for customers, but really it's about meeting load and reliability.
And with that, the presentation wrapped up. And I hope everyone left the briefing and this podcast episode with a better understanding of some of the market forces driving up gas bills this year. As always, customers struggling to pay their utility bills should reach out to their utility first to work on a payment plan and inquire about resources that may be available to help, including the Wisconsin Home Energy Assistance Program. Additional information and links to resources can be found at the Keep Wisconsin Warm Fund, kwwf.org.
Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. Please support our work. You can subscribe to the Electric Wire podcast if you haven't already, and you can follow us on Twitter at The Electric Wire. Thanks also to the members of the Customers First Coalition for supporting this podcast. Our members are Dairyland Power Cooperative, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, WPPI Energy, Renew Wisconsin, the Citizens Utility Board, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 2150, and the Wisconsin Electric Cooperatives Association. Thanks again for listening. We'll have a new episode next month.